In this podcast episode, Joe Rogan and guest Dave Smith engage in a wide-ranging conversation covering finance scandals, geopolitical conflicts, mixed martial arts (MMA), media dynamics, and cultural commentary. They examine controversial issues, including insider trading allegations involving Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald, the Israel-Iran conflict and its implications for American politics, the evolution and challenges in MMA, and critiques of mainstream media and political discourse. The discussion begins with Dave Smith's anecdote about a friend who retired after making a massive bet on oil prices, highlighting the often uninvestigated trades yielding billions within minutes. This segues into a deeper dive on Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary embroiled in controversy due to his connections with Jeffrey Epstein and accusations related to tariff refund trades. The duo explores allegations that Lutnick's former firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, now chaired by his sons, stood to profit from buying rights to potential tariff refunds tied to Trump-era tariffs. Though internal materials suggested the firm facilitated some trades, public statements and investigations have found no conclusive evidence that significant profits were booked or that illegal activity occurred. Smith and Rogan express skepticism regarding the opacity and ethics of such financial dealings, noting the general lack of accountability in these high-stakes environments. They discuss an interview in which Lutnick downplays his relationship with Epstein, describing a brief encounter involving a massage table and repudiating further contact. The conversation reflects on the broader scandal of various powerful figures remaining in office despite Epstein-related revelations. Smith and Rogan critique the moral and political cowardice that allows such denials and evasions, describing the culture of deception around Epstein's network. The topic shifts to immigration policy, focusing on the scale of illegal immigration, estimated between 30 and 50 million by some experts, and the challenges it poses to U.S. sovereignty and social stability. They talk about ICE's recent deployment in airports and the logistical questions around staffing and enforcement. Smith articulates concerns about asylum policies, highlighting claims that known terrorists exploit the system to remain in the U.S. legally. They explore the bipartisan failures regarding border security and the humanitarian crises linked to unchecked migration, including child trafficking and law enforcement abuses. Both express frustration with political narratives that ignore public opposition to open borders. Smith and Rogan address the role of social media platforms and corporate media, praising the rise of podcasts and independent content for breaking the monopoly on narratives held by traditional outlets. They discuss Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter and its efforts to expose and reduce bot accounts, contrasting this with entrenched media bias and scripted news personalities who lack authenticity. The episode underscores the value of genuine, unscripted dialogue as embodied by shows like Rogan's and Tim Dillon's, whose humorous and incisive rants they praise highly. An extensive portion of the conversation is devoted to the geopolitical crises in the Middle East, particularly the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran and the U.S.'s role in it. Smith critiques the war on terror's expansion into a proxy war, heavily influenced by the Israel lobby and Netanyahu's long-standing push for regime change in Iran. The pair discuss Iranian domestic protests and repression, questioning narrative claims about death tolls while acknowledging the brutality of the regime. They reflect on the hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy, which funds authoritarian allies while purporting to champion democracy and human rights. Smith is critical of the bipartisan consensus favoring interventionist, war-profiteering agendas that often align with Israel's territorial ambitions, including the Greater Israel Project. They also talk about the split in American public opinion, with Democrats largely opposing further military action versus significant Republican support, framed by some media as a MAGA-driven agenda, which they dispute in nuance. Building on the foreign policy discourse, the conversation touches on the fracturing of political coalitions, particularly Donald Trump's erosion of his earlier base by supporting a war widely opposed by his 2020 voters. Smith expresses hope that figures like Thomas Massie could represent an authentic America First approach without succumbing to establishment pressures. They also analyze the limitations of the MAGA branding, emphasizing that no large political group is homogenous and cautioning against simplistic tribalism. Shifting to sports, the episode provides rich insights into MMA, discussing notable fighters and career trajectories. They highlight John Jones's protege Gabe, praising his wrestling pedigree and striking development, Ilia Topuria's lethal performances, including his cold knockout of Max Holloway, and Francis Ngannou's terrifying evolution into a more complete fighter. The conversation covers the challenges in heavyweight divisions, fighter health, and the impact of weight cutting, criticizing the unhealthy practices of drastic dehydration and advocating for more granular, sensible weight classes in MMA. They also critique current UFC business moves, such as shifting to streaming platforms like Paramount Plus, debating the consumer benefits versus risks to traditional pay-per-view revenue models. Smith and Rogan reminisce on infamous aspects of combat sports, from the going postal phenomenon to classic fights and fighters like Joe Lauzon, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, Anderson Silva, and Stipe Miocic. They delve into fight strategies, psychological impacts of knockouts, the rise of new techniques like calf kicks, and the importance of toughness and adaptation in elite competition. The conversation also touches on how fight commentary and fan engagement can shape public perception of the sport. The podcast wraps up addressing the role of public intellectuals and commentators such as Ben Shapiro, Douglas Murray, and Coleman Hughes. Smith criticizes the unwillingness of many mainstream figures to engage honestly with critics on contentious topics, often defaulting to ad hominem attacks or intellectual gatekeeping. The conversation reflects on the corrosive effects of tribalism and ideological rigidity in public discourse, arguing for reasoned, good-faith conversations across political fault lines. They commend those who maintain civility and genuine debate despite deep disagreements. Throughout the episode, Joe Rogan and Dave Smith revel in podcasting as a medium where authenticity can flourish. They praise comedians like Tim Dillon for blending humor with sharp social critique, applauding the power of genuine, often irreverent conversation over the scripted and controlled narratives of corporate media. The discussion highlights how personalities cultivate trust and engagement by being unapologetically themselves, fostering a community of listeners who seek unfiltered perspectives.